This video was inspired by a comment from Juanita Dark. Thanks, Juanita. Spider-Man Homecoming is pretty great. The action, the plot, the humor, the world building, so much of this movie knocks it out of the park. Every side character is fun to watch, the Vulture is simultaneously sympathetic yet intimidating, and you really feel like these are kids that you're watching. While it spends too much time focusing on Iron Man and criminally underused both Bokeem Woodbine and Marissa Tomei, it's still very enjoyable. Spider-Man Far From Home was much less enjoyable, at least for me. While there are parts that are great, like the main romance and the scene where Mysterio plays with Peter's fears, it's a step down in a lot of ways from the first movie. Jacob Batalon's Ned was one of the best parts of Homecoming, and he's pretty much reduced to the one same joke over and over again. Mysterio isn't nearly as compelling as the Vulture, and the action is pretty lackluster until the finale. And while I saw the twist coming in the first one, I really enjoyed it, which I can't say happened in the sequel. That being said, in both films, Tom Holland's Peter is pretty good. But, and I know I'm not unique in this observation, and if I knew who was first, I would credit them, this doesn't exactly feel like Peter Parker. Comics Peter is a loner, hiding everything about his spider life from his friends and family, pretty much until he got married. MCU Peter's got a best friend that shares a secret, he's got a superhero mentor that knows everything about him, and he's guided by Nick Fury. Comics Peter is the first Spider-Man, ultimately carving out what it means to be a hero all by himself. MCU Peter is trying to fill the shoes of an iconic hero that just died, and his suit is given to him by a more technologically intelligent individual. I'm sure if you're familiar with the comics, you've probably noticed, as I, and again many others on the internet did, that this Peter has a lot more in common with Miles Morales than Earth 616 Peter Parker. Ned Leeds in the comics, also, is an adult, white, muscular business associate of Peter's, and MCU Ned much more resembles Genki Lee, Miles Morales' plus-size Asian-American roommate that covers for him when he's out Spider-Manning. Genki first learned that Miles had powers with Lego shattering. Sound familiar? Now, as Batalon himself has defended, Ned is not Genki. They have different personalities, they don't look alike, and they have different love interests. However, they play the same role, and people have noticed the similarities. Also, MCU Peter isn't allowed to join the Avengers due to irresponsibility and inexperience, just like Miles wasn't allowed to join the Ultimates. While Peter and Miles have some differences, certainly, they both serve the same role in the greater superhero universe, the newcomer that has just arrived on the superhero scene and is taking up the role of a previous superhero. Finally, 616 Peter was a youth in the 1960s, and his attitude reflects this. While he's always been progressive, his early days were spent supporting the people and taking down warmongers, crime lords, burglars, madmen, Soviets, and business moguls. Peter was the working-class hero, and his enemies reflected that. MCU Peter's villains have all been villains motivated by a different hero, and he's ultimately just cleaning up that hero's mess, just like Miles was left to deal with all of Ultimate Peter Parker's villains upon his death. MCU Peter is also very much a Gen Z hero, and though supposedly working class, he is much more affluent than a traditional Peter Parker, and spends extended periods away from home. So, while it's pretty obvious that the MCU's Spider-Man shares more in common with Miles Morales than Peter Parker, what does it matter? You might ask. After all, we got a Miles Spider-Man movie, and it won an Oscar. Black and Latino boys still got to see themselves as Spider-Man, and Into the Spider-Verse was possibly the best Spider-Man movie ever. Also, it's not like Spider-Man Homecoming was anti-progressive. It actually had more women and girls of color than Into the Spider-Verse did, even if it did rely on old-fashioned Hollywood colorist casting practices, and it tried to put forth a working-class message. It didn't really succeed at that, but, at least it tried. But besides the fact that twice as many people saw Homecoming, and 3 times as many people saw Far From Home, the Miles aspects of MCU Peter's character highlight one truth. Despite their claims of progressiveness, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not concerned with presenting representation when it comes to lead characters. I've already addressed how sidekick black characters aren't given nearly as much development as their white counterparts in the MCU. I've also already talked about how the Captain Marvel movie retconned Monica Rambeau from being an independent hero to being inspired by her white stepmom, and now I'd like to talk about how the Marvel Cinematic Universe wants its future to remain white, at least in part. A Civil War post-credit scene would have been the perfect time to introduce Miles Morales. grandfather in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man. And you've got a better story for Civil War. Tony isn't roping in some kid, and it makes sense to bring in somebody established, but as of yet unmentioned in the MCU. Furthermore, it makes sense for Tobey Maguire's Peter, the one who is obsessed with personal responsibility, to be opposing Cap. Then, upon doing well, but realizing he's not young enough to pull this off anymore, he can hint on the inclusion of Miles. And all of a sudden, you've got an opportunity for Spider-Man Homecoming not tied to Iron Man, not about becoming an Avenger, and not about the sad sacrifice of Peter Parker, or even necessarily about Miles becoming Spider-Man because of Peter. But you do have a chance for a more interesting, focused, and honestly healthy mentor-apprentice relationship. But still, as Spider-Man represents the future of the MCU, it makes sense for him to be white. After all, the future of the MCU so far seems to be white. Of the 6 announced Phase 4 movies, only one has a lead character of color. Black Panther 2 and Blade are both scheduled for after this phase, and will be flanked by sequels for other white heroes that haven't been announced yet, presumably. Only 2 of the 8 pay-locked Disney Plus series are expected to have lead characters of color, and despite the diverse press conferences that Disney holds, we know from past experience that a diverse cast doesn't necessarily mean actual representation. But, with Far From Home, it is explicitly said that the future of the MCU's superhero universe lies with Peter Parker's Spider-Man. The other heroes name-dropped in this movie are white. War Machine isn't even considered to inherit the Iron Man legacy, even though he's the obvious choice. Falcon is delegated to be in a streaming service that people who aren't rich really can't afford, and Jane Foster is coming back, in case we thought that Valkyrie could be the romantic lead for more than one movie. But more than anything, Peter is the new Tony Stark. Peter is the new face of the MCU. Let me make it clear, though, what I am not saying. I'm not saying it's racist to like Spider-Man Homecoming, obviously. I am not saying that Marvel Studios should not have made a Peter Parker movie. What I'm saying is that Marvel Studios recognized that Miles' story was more relatable and more authentic to Gen Z children, but that they still wanted that recognizable, safe, white face and Parker name on their Spider-Man, even if he doesn't act like Parker, even if he has different friends, and even if he has a black and red costume. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is far from a perfect movie when it comes to representation. The only main character that's a woman of color is a stereotype. Miles' mom is basically just a cameo, and save Spider-Noir's colorblindness, the only characters with disabilities are villains. But, that being said, it did allow a lot of kids to see themselves as Spider-Man that hadn't before. Working Halloween, I've seen so many kids dressed up as Miles Morales, and it's honestly really encouraging. So then, when Marvel Studios liked Miles' story, and costume, and his place in the universe, and chose that they didn't like Miles himself, that's a little bit discouraging. Thanks for watching.